Hello, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider Extra. Matthew Coller along with Sam Ekstrom here. And as we lead up to the draft, thought we'd have a little fun and look back at some of the drafts of Vikings past, and maybe their new leadership can correct some of the mistakes or maybe take some of the things that worked and carry those over. So we wanted to talk about the best and worst draft picks of the last 5 years. Now that we have a pretty good sample on a lot of them, but then there is still some yet to be determined. So, Sam, I'm just going to start off. I'm going to get one right off the board for best draft picks. I'm going to go Justin Jefferson. It was the best draft pick of the last 5 years for the Minnesota Vikings. He was involved in a trade that from a guy that you could also have on this list. We'll see if you have him on yours. But I think that there's a great case to say when you draft a generational talent who starts to match Randy Moss records in his first 2 years, that Justin Jefferson goes as my top best Vikings draft pick.
Yep, undeniable. And the fact that they were able to get him pretty late in the first round makes it even better that so many other teams missed on it and they could snatch him up in the 20s. That's pretty unbelievable. That's got to be number one. I think from a value standpoint, the KJ Osborne pick is looking pretty good too. I mean, that's a 5th-round receiver who is awfully productive last year, over 600 yards, 8 touchdowns. That's really good value. I don't know if Stephon Diggs qualifies in the last 5 years. He was another 5th-round guy that would obviously be toward the top of the list. But I'd go with Brian O'Neill as well. Brian O'Neill in the 2nd round. He's been one of the more consistent right tackles in football the last 4 years, long-term deal. And you know, to get someone who I think people were like, is he heavy enough to be a tackle? You know, he's quick, but can he hold up against these edge rushers? He's certainly proven that he can, and he's been a really functional, consistent, durable tackle for the Vikings.
He certainly has. And one of the reasons we had to do last 5 years is because if it was stretching back to 2015, you could just use all of those draft picks. You could just say Eric Kendricks, Danielle Hunter, Stephon Diggs, and other than Jefferson, our conversation is over. So this only stretches back to the 2017 draft, where I will go with Dalvin Cook is one of their best draft picks. Now, you can debate and certainly have a good argument against drafting a running back, and the Vikings traded up. And so on draft night, it's like, you better be sure that Dalvin Cook is going to be a great player because of his positional value and because of what you're giving up to get him, even if it was just later on draft capital. But he has truly been one of the best running backs in the NFL. I think the only guy that you have a clear-cut case for being better than Dalvin Cook during that stretch is Derrick Henry of the Tennessee Titans. Maybe New Orleans Saints fans would argue Alvin Kamara. Christian McCaffrey has been banged up in recent years, but he got off to a very hot start to his career. But aside from that, I mean, Dalvin Cook has been truly the engine of this Vikings offense since he was drafted in 2017. So now we agree on those three, I assume, unless you have a dark horse. Is there anybody else that you would consider here? Because I think it says a little something about where the Vikings are at, that this conversation after those three becomes much, much tougher.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, we even had this conversation on the podcast on Monday. Irv Smith Jr. is not that good of a draft pick through 3 seasons. He's only got 66 receptions, no more than 350 yards, I think, in either season. And he missed a year with injury. So the Vikings have not been able to use him to the extent they wanted to. I think they had grand visions for what he could be. And last year might have been his breakout year, if not for the injury. But you can't really judge that as a phenomenal draft pick yet. So, I mean, I guess there's maybe a couple in waiting with Christian Darrisaw, Cameron Bynum. We might look back and say, wow, brilliant draft picks after this season. But I don't think we can say that yet. So really, there's a lot more duds than there are hits. That's for sure.
I would say the other guy that you brought up, KJ Osborne, is kind of a low-key one or an under-the-radar one. Tyler Conklin would be that too, that Conklin was not a huge difference maker in the Vikings offense last year, but also gave them very decent play and earned a contract with the Jets because of it in New York. And for a 5th-round draft pick tight end, that's pretty good to make good on your draft status. I mean, we often see 5th-rounders don't even make the team for 2 years, and he became their starter and filled the role of Irv Smith Jr. admirably last year. So that was another good pick. Now, the worst draft picks by the Vikings over the last 5 years, I will let you kick us off and have the first selection here for worst picks.
Who to choose? The kicker in the fifth round stands out for one. Pat Elflein in the third round didn't work out great. Probably Jeff Gladney though. I mean, to sink a first round pick into a corner, and it's not the team's fault, that this didn't work out. This was an off the field issue, and I think they made the right choice to part ways. But to lose a first round pick at a high positional value spot, and to still feel the repercussions, I think, of having very little pipeline in the way of cornerback on this roster, that's an absolute killer.
Absolutely the top pick, especially considering what happened. The reason that he was cut, it wasn't for injury or randomness or bad luck, but something that he did off the field, forcing the team's hand to let him go. I think that makes it much tougher. Now, there's maybe a competition between a few guys here. Garrett Bradbury is probably my pick. And the reason that this would be a hard one is that he's played. And a lot of times when you have a bad draft pick, they don't even get in the game. Laquan Treadwell rarely was on the field, was playing kind of a number 3 role, but was not an impact player at all and just got usurped by other players. Garrett Bradbury has largely been on the field aside from one benching last year. It's just that his pass blocking numbers have been among the lowest in the entire NFL. And this goes for a value conversation too. If you're going to draft a center, which is the lowest paid position that's non-specialist in the NFL, that needs to be really good in order to justify it with a first round pick, especially when you start peeking down the draft board at other players that were selected after Garrett Bradbury. So I think that they were paying a first round pick to try to get every ounce out of that center to help them right away. And Garrett Bradbury has not been an above replacement level player. In fact, he was replaced last year by Mason Cole, and we didn't see a drop off. So I think I'm going to select Garrett Bradbury, but the only tricky part is just that there are other guys on this list who barely even got on the field.
Yeah, Bradbury certainly played more than like a Gladney did, but what his contribution represented was probably a negative for the team for 3 straight years and maybe even a 4th year coming up. So I definitely get that one. And Mike Hughes too. I mean, another cornerback in the first round who, wasn't terrible when he was on the field, but he was rarely on the field. And the Vikings would go into the season counting on him to be a contributor, and then it would never come to fruition because he couldn't stay healthy. So I think missing out on several really first round picks in this stretch kind of is the main story. 2017, they don't have one. Then Mike Hughes in 2018, Garrett Bradbury in 2019, Jeff Gladney in 2020. If not for Justin Jefferson, we'd be talking about a crazy drought without a good first round pick. Even going back to Laquan Treadwell, who was pretty rough. Trey Waynes was average, and then Anthony Barr much better, Teddy Bridgewater much better. But it's been kind of a dark spell for those high round picks, with the exception of Jefferson.
And anything into the middle rounds, I think, is really about just the value that they paid for it and what the logic was at the time. So Alexander Mattison has been an okay player for the Vikings, a good fill-in for Dalvin Cook at times, but they took a running back in the 3rd round when they had a superstar running back. And it's just hard to really put your finger on that one when 3rd round picks sometimes become quite good players. And instead they chose a non-value position where I think they could have replaced a backup spot for Dalvin Cook with almost anybody, and they decided to do that. That would be questionable. Ezra Cleveland has been fine for them for the last 2 years, but he was drafted to be their future left tackle and then has only been a guard and has only been, in his first year, he was below average, just learning how to play the position. Then they forced him to change and he's more of an average guard. I think you do wonder about that. Then when you're forced to take another tackle after never trying Ezra Cleveland at tackle, like all this is a very Vikingsy over the last few years. And I would say for this draft, Christian Darrisaw has potential to be on our list as somebody who showed flashes in year 1 of being very good. Now, here's a question though. If Kellen Mond doesn't make it even through this year's training camp, does he belong on this list for you? I would say no, because it's fine to take a shot at a 3rd round quarterback. It's not like it crushes your future, and they usually don't work out. So to me, it's not that big of a deal. It doesn't implode your franchise, but do you think he should be on this list if it does not work out this year?
No, I mean, for the simple reason that you're not expecting him to start. I mean, you have your starter. If it's just a battle for a backup job, which is the same thing it was last year, yeah, I can't get too worked up about that. I don't think that a third round, because are we putting Chaz Surratt in this conversation? Are we putting Wyatt Davis in this conversation? I don't think that Mond classifies as an awful draft pick. I like the swing for him. And it probably was never realistic for him to start in his first year or even his first 2 years.
Right. And he still has the opportunity going into this year to beat out Sean Mannion, take over that backup spot. And even if he's a reasonably decent backup quarterback, probably bringing third round value to that draft pick. All right. Leave your lists for us or ones we left out in the comments section. Make sure you go listen to the Purple Insider podcast as always, and purpleinsider.com to see our written work. And we will catch you next time.